Welcome, Mr. Prime Minister.
It's a pleasure to be here, Patty.
We've been plotting this for a while. We provided a beautiful venue for you.
And just an extraordinary room filled with extremely influential thought leaders, political leaders, and business leaders who just happen to be women.
That's... So, Mr. Prime Minister, you're seeing President Trump tomorrow. What is...
I was in town for this, though, just so you know.
He was. What is a successful meeting with President Trump look like?
You know, Canada and the United States have a relationship unlike any two countries in the world. We are more interconnected. The goods and services and people who flow back and forth across the border, the level of connections, of integrations between our two economies has never been replicated anywhere around the world. A good relationship is one in which we agree that we need to work to improve opportunities for our citizens, improve opportunities for our countries to succeed, and figure out ways to do that together. And President Trump got elected on many of the same goals that I got elected on, of making sure people who don't feel like the success and the growth of the economy has worked for them do better, and that's what I've stayed focused on. We don't always have the same policy prescriptions to do that, but in our desire to help the middle class and those working hard to join it, we always find common ground.
Without telling us what you don't want to tell us about what is on your agenda tomorrow, I like your socks. He has red polka dot socks on. They're cool. You're famous for your socks.
It distracts people every now and then.
It does. That's a.
I just used up 5 seconds of a conversation about Trump.
Good. What is on your agenda? What do you hope to accomplish tomorrow, though? I mean, the state of the world. Chrystia Freeland said today at the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit that this is the most uncertain moment in international relations since the Second World War. This is a very important meeting tomorrow. What do you hope to accomplish?
Listen, I have conversations with the president every few weeks on any number of things. So this is a continuation of the important engagement that Canadians expect their prime minister to have with our closest ally and largest trading partner. We're obviously going to be talking about trade, about opportunities for our citizens. We're going to be talking about NAFTA and the fact that it has led to great opportunities for our citizens. But there's always ways to improve and modernize any deal out there. We're going to talk about the kinds of things we can do to better serve the people who elected us to places of power.
One more question about talking with Trump. How do you think about talking with, negotiating with the President of the United States compared with the way you talk and negotiate with other leaders around the world?
I think the approach is always consistent in that you look for areas of agreement. You look for things where you find common ground, and you look for ways to work together to improve the outcomes, not just for your own country, but for both of your countries in the bilateral relationship. So the way I focus on how we work with the United States is looking at the jobs we can create both in Canada and the United States through successful partnerships, through lowering barriers and tariffs, through creating investment opportunities by drawing in great intellectual capital, by creating opportunities for our citizens to succeed, because Canada and the United States are tremendously intertwined, and when one does well, the other does well, and when we both do well together, I think we're unstoppable in the world.
How would you like to modernize NAFTA?
I think there's a lot of things we can look at, from updating sort of the digital economy pieces to looking at new technologies around pre-clearance and border issues. But one of the things that I think is more and more important in trade deals is recognizing that making trade deals more progressive actually matters. See, we've always put forward pro-growth policies, and we've grown the economy, but the promise that everyone would benefit when the economy grew hasn't always borne fruit for everyone. So we have to think about how we can now make trade deals and growth policies that do benefit everyone, not just the richest, not just the company owners or the government's bottom line, but ordinary people as well. And that's where elements around gender, putting a gender chapter into NAFTA.
And what does that mean, putting a gender chapter into NAFTA?
It means recognizing that trade has different impacts on women than it does on men. I mean, we just signed the first ever, for a G7 country, gender chapter in a trade deal with Chile. We updated our free trade agreement with Chile, and we had specifically a gender issue. So it talks about things like pay equity for like women's rights, like maternity leave, things like that. It can be aspirational, it can be concrete, but recognizing that putting progressive elements into trade deals, labor protections, environmental protections, actually helps us make a case for trade and reassure people that the benefits of trade will be distributed more fairly and not just to the small number of people who've always benefited from it in the past.
How are you looking, Mr. Prime Minister?
I think that was Christia, so that doesn't count.
How are you looking at the national security, national meaning the North American security situation right now with North Korea, and how are you working with the United States too?
The cooperation between the Canadian and the military, the American military, is again unique. The level to which our troops train together, the only joint command in the world, NORAD, which protects North American airspace, is a model of success. I mean, our soldiers, men and women of the Canadian forces, fight alongside American forces everywhere in the world. And the level of cooperation and alignment on keeping our citizens safe is something that we can all be both reassured by and proud of.
So is there something that you would like to see happen in terms of the negotiations with, or the North Korea situation that would be considered progress in your mind?
Well, I think there's no question that how we work together with all partners in the region that can have influence on North Korea really matters. China has a role to play, Russia has a role to play, South Korea, Japan, the United States, all Pacific nations need to work together, and the fact that we have clear UN sanctions and are moving forward in a thoughtful way around the Security Council means we are putting real pressure on the North Korean government, and hopefully the various pressures will de-escalate a situation that is very scary for everyone.
So Justin Trudeau became Prime Minister in 2015, and we're going to talk about your path to this role in a little bit. But what were your key goals when you moved into this job? I
think the first one was to pull people together. There's an awful lot of anxiety out there that people feel about whether there'll be the kind of success for their kids that was there for their parents' generation. A lot of people are worried about the future, and we were focused on putting together a narrative of, yes, we're facing challenges, but we can solve them together. So I wanted to pull together a government that did a better job of reflecting the diversity of Canada, both in regional diversity, but also in backgrounds and ethnicity, but also, most importantly, having gender parity on cabinet. So there were as many women at the cabinet table as men, and that was really important, and it has led to a better level of decision making than we could ever have imagined. It wasn't just the right thing to do, it was the smart thing to do, and that's the message that I'm pushing.
This was not just a case of finding women out there. This was, you spent a few years planting the seeds on the path to gender diversity, gender equality. And I'd like you to tell this group a little bit about how you did that and got women to run for office in Canada, because I think it's very instructive for this community.
Well, some of you may remember when I was asked why have a gender balanced cabinet, I sort of shrugged and said, well, because it's 2015. But before it could be 2015, it had to be 2014, 2013, 2012, where I and my team, we went out and actively encouraged and recruited women to run. We had a campaign through our mailing list in the party saying, ask her to run, saying, do you know a woman who is strong and civically minded and would be a great addition to politics? Well, ask her to run. Because studies have shown when you ask a woman if she'll run for politics, her first question to you is, really, do you think I should do it? Or why me? Why do you think I would be good at it? Whereas if you ask a man, his first question is usually, what took you so long to ask me? And you have to work and encourage and draw it. And I know this by direct experience. I'm going to embarrass her by telling her story. Chrystia Freeland was working for Thomson Reuters as an incredibly successful economic journalist in New York with a young family, and I asked her to run for politics, which involved leaving New York to move to Toronto, to run for a nomination that I couldn't guarantee she was going to win, and then run in a by-election as a distant third-party candidate so that maybe she could move to Ottawa. And when I first asked her, she hesitated. And it took weeks of asking her and appealing to both service, but also her capacity to serve, to say, look, we need your voice. And thank God we have her as our foreign minister now. But it took work to go out and recruit all these extraordinary women to run. And now that we have a cabinet and a government and quite frankly, a party with a lot of great, strong young women, the challenge we have is despite all their presences, we're still very much in an old-fashioned man's game of politics where retaining those extraordinary women continues to be a very real challenge as well. And we're having to look at how we change things in the workplace. I mean, we have our Minister of Democratic Institutions, Karina Gould, really exciting. She's pregnant. She's going to have a baby in the spring. It's hugely amazing, but what do we do about maternity leave?
This is the first minister
for a cabinet. The first minister in Canada, and maybe one of the first in Western democracies, to be having a kid. So what does maternity leave look like? And basically we've said, we're going to figure it out, whatever her priorities are. But our priority for her is that first and foremost, she is a great mom and she has all the time she needs.
So how many weeks are you giving her?
We're giving her as many as we can figure out that we need to, and as many as she wants. Like, we don't know. We're writing this, but we're writing it together with her, and she gets to help define it, and hopefully we get to show that it's possible to be a minister and a mom and everything according to your own choices. She's in the driver's seat there, and we're going to change.
So Justin Trudeau is the eldest of 3 sons of the former Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau, who was Prime Minister for 15 years, and Margaret Trudeau. You studied literature at McGill. You graduated in 1994. You take us from there. Tell us what you decided to do from there.
I decided I wanted to become a teacher. So I started in Teachers College at McGill in Montreal, still living at home with my dad and my brothers, and then realized that I needed to get out of the city, moved out west to Vancouver, became a ski bum for a few months. I was working as a snowboard instructor and a bouncer in a nightclub. And after a few weeks, maybe a month or two, every spare second I got wasn't on the slopes, it was actually in the library because my brain was starved of stimulation of reading, and I decided I needed to go back to school. Went back to school, finished my B.Ed, became a high school teacher, and was happy to have found my way of making a difference, which was through teaching. Then I moved back to Montreal, met the extraordinary woman who would shape me into the man I am now, Sophie, who's here with us. Started doing public speaking in environmental advocacy and youth activism, and then got dragged into politics because turned out I was sort of good at it.
But when did you think I might follow in my father's footsteps and become and make my way to prime minister?
The first time I thought that I was probably about 4 or 5 years old, but I sort of shrugged it off because the next week I wanted to be an astronaut, and the week after that I wanted to be a fireman because that was the whole thing. I actually went through a bit of a crisis at the end of high school, where I realized I was on a path I was trying to fulfill to impress my dad or impress myself, and I sort of lost myself, and I realized, no, I didn't want to follow my father's path, and I gave up on going into politics. I said, I'll do something else that's totally mine. I'll become a teacher, and I was perfectly happy in that, and it wasn't until I followed my own path, and it led back to the same place that my father had been in a very organic way, which prevented me from ever having to, a lot of people, certainly if you talk to my opponents, my father being prime minister is the only reason I'm prime minister today. But I never worried about that because I knew how hard I worked through my own way and my own path to get to where I am. And that hard work left me feeling very comfortable that we're doing the right things the right way with great people around, and finding out how to make the best difference you can in the world is the challenge we all have.
I'd like you to tell me how significant these two very important events in your life were. Your father died fairly young in 2000 of prostate cancer. Before your father died, you lost your brother in a backcountry skiing accident in an avalanche. What did those two events do?
Obviously, they affect you. I learned loss. I helped my mom through the loss of a child that no one should ever go through. And my mom had always had challenges around mental health. She struggles with bipolar disorder, and learning how to find joy and help my mom find joy again. It sort of took the wind out of the sails of my dad, which sort of led to his succumbing a couple of years later. But learning how to deal with grief, how to remember and realize what's really important and stay focused on what really matters was the lesson that I drew from that. And I don't hide the fact that I grew up son of a prime minister. I got to travel around the world, meet kings and queens and presidents, and go to great schools and have great opportunities. But I also, was a child of divorce, and I had a brother die, and we have the same kinds of challenges that any family does. So the learning process of trying to do right with what you have and find the meaning in what you have to offer the world is sort of a universal challenge for each and every one of us. And for me, I looked at trying to make a positive difference in a world that, quite frankly, I was aware had given me an awful lot. And that's how I drew meaning and value out of loss and death and opportunity together.
What's the biggest thing you learned from your father?
To trust people. It's easy to simplify. It's easy to reduce complex problems to the lowest common denominator and say, oh, if we scare people into doing this, or if we divide them strategically into that, we could probably win or get an advantage. I find that by trusting people to be reasonable, thoughtful about their lives, about their community, about their world, respect people's intelligence and expect more of them. I mean, as a teacher, I'm very familiar with the old experiment where you take a group of kids, split them in half randomly so they're about the same. You give one group of kids to one teacher and you tell them that these are the gifted kids, they're really, really smart. And you give the other group of kids to a teacher and say, oh yeah, no, these are the slow kids, they're really, really dumb, even though they're exactly equivalent in terms of groups. Well, by the end of the year, the smart class will have succeeded to a greater degree and the slow class will have declined. How you treat people is often what you'll get out from them. So I think treating people as intelligent citizens is a very powerful way of governing.
So speaking of high school, we have a group of 30-some high school girls here.
Hello.
Who are honored guests. And I would like to close this by asking you to put your high school teacher hat back on and your prime minister hat and give them your best advice for thinking about their exciting, fabulous careers that are ahead of them.
Well, you've been around these extraordinary women all day for this entire event, listening to inspiring stories, people telling you that you can do anything, you can achieve anything. Obviously, listen to them, but challenge them as well. Your experiences will be very different from the experience of everyone around. Your experiences are your own. Trust your instincts, trust yourselves, be gentle with yourselves, but be fierce as well with how you demand better from the world. You are growing up in a world that unfortunately is still fundamentally unfair. You still won't be given, even though we've made a lot of progress, you're still going to have to fight battles that the boys in your class won't have to fight. You're going to need some of them to be allies. You're going to need to push back hard against other ones. But know that men can be allies as well. Men, some of us out there know that our success depends on your success. And I try and raise my daughter to know she can do anything, but I also make sure I'm raising my sons to know that my daughter can do everything. And that message of grabbing empowerment and taking control of your lives and lifting up your sisters and bringing along those brothers at the same time is going to be really important to make the world what we need it to become.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much.
What a pleasure, Patty.
It was a pleasure.